Today it's a new episode for us for a podcast Building the Open Web. Today we have Raphael from Eva Coop. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Cool. So maybe we can start with your background. Where did you grow up?
Actually, I grew up in North America, but you probably see from the French accent that I grew up in Canada. I grew up in the province of Quebec in Canada, in a small northern town called Saguenay. But I actually live in Montreal, but I'm back there during the quarantine. So I had to get away from the city with all these quarantine measures. But yeah, I'm living in Montreal, and Eva is based in Montreal.
Got it. And how did you get into software development in the first place?
Actually, when I was growing up, I was working for my father's company. He had a local computer store. He was doing some programming for local businesses that needed some systems. And so I've always worked with my father growing up, and I became heavily interested in software development because I realized pretty quickly that it was a way to give thoughts. Like, it was a way to use mathematics to like solve inefficiencies in society by having less humans doing the jobs for many systems and have more code, have more automation. And I always liked like problem solving in general, so I got really interested in programming. Also, I was playing a lot of games growing up as a early teenager, one of them being World of Warcraft, and I started do private servers and many things. So I became really interested in how all those games were built. So I started building my own Mario Brothers game and things like that. So I mostly started with games, and then I got into reverse engineering. So I was interested in how I could learn how a system is made and so on. So I was doing I was analyzing network traffic and things like that. So that's what got me started. It's really being a teenager on the internet and being interested on how these things work, and also working for my father's company. But yeah, I fell in love in with software development at that time, and it remains still. I studied software engineering. I started my first company at 16 years old to do websites for people, and a couple of years later, I got interested into blockchain, and that's what brings me here because I've been working on Eva since 2 years.
And how did you get into blockchain?
Actually, it's a funny story. I heard about Bitcoin like many people first because I knew it was a new way of doing transaction online that I didn't understand much about it. But then a friend of mine started investing into blockchain, so I looked over it, and uh, I started making bots to actually trade online on markets back in 2017. And after that, I learned more about blockchain. I started with the game of making bots for investment, and then I learned more about smart contracts and how it could change the way we do business with each other to have a transparent layer in an open database. And I started seeing it as an addition to the current economy we have right now, and it got me really excited about it and how it could be the next step of our internet and binding the economy. So that's what got me interested. I saw there was a real value in the products we could create, so I decided to create with a friend of mine our own blockchain venture. I started reading many books on blockchain, one of them being Blockchain Revolution by Don Tapscott. And it was really interesting to see how ride sharing was given as an example in the book on how we could replace the man in the middle between those transactions to have a real peer-to-peer transaction in a digital system between the rider and the driver. And I realized that there was no serious projects that were already implementing it, and it was still an idea. So a friend of mine that is still involved in Eva decided to launch Eva together to solve that problem, especially with the market conditions in where we come from, in the province of Quebec, where it was basically only Uber, no Lyft. It's still no Lyft. So it was pretty much a taxi and Uber. So we decided to come up with the local alternative. And we had to do many steps to get approved by the government and so on. So it was not a free market to just go in, because the laws were really unclear at first. So we had to do lobbyism, and we hit many challenges before launching. But now we've been operating since 1 year, and the blockchain part was a critical decision, because actually creates a lot of challenges. I think we're gonna talk about them today, but yeah, that's what got us into blockchain and this venture. And we realized that we needed a way to replace the person in the middle, especially in the collaborative economy.
And what was the very first things you focused on when you started on Eva?
As many businesses, is to get an incorporation. So we got incorporated as Eva Global Incorporated. We also envisioned a way to democratize actual blockchain businesses, because it's fine to do a peer-to-peer protocol, but your business in the real world still needs to have an entity in which your legal obligation are faced on. So we created the first cooperative for the first city we're operating in. So we created a driver cooperative in Montreal that would be the first franchise for our Eva business. So it would be the first driver-owned franchise that actual have rights. So we incorporated that business. We got offices in Montreal, really nice offices, where we were a small team of two developers working, and we started doing the protocol with the smart contract, the client app with React Native technology, and so on.
And how long did it take you to build the initial product?
The first MVP was done in 4 months. We came up with a smart contract on EOS.io pretty quickly. The mainnet was launching in those days. We're talking here the summer 2018. So we were following what's happening with the mainnet. We were playing with our own blockchain instance, EOS.io blockchain instance, to do our own net, because we realized pretty quickly that the transaction cost was a bit too high for a starting business on the mainnet, especially early stage like we were. So basically, we started our own blockchain. We familiarized ourselves with how to have EOS.io nodes and so on. And we came up with this client app that would speak to the blockchain. We had pretty big challenges in terms of cryptography, to make sure that anything public on the blockchain has a secure cryptographical protocol. And we created the protocol for the MVP, and we actually had media. We've shown the app in front of the media and so on pretty quickly with this MVP, but it was not working that well. So we've improved the product a lot since then. We first launched on the Apple Store and Google Play Store in October 2018, but at the time we were not legal. We had to get a ministerial decree from the Quebec government to actually start operating. So we had to do lobbyism, and we actually met the government to present them an alternative that would be Quebec made against the giant Uber. And they didn't know anything about blockchain. For them, blockchain is only a database technology, which it is, but there's also a whole philosophy behind it. So that's this period where we had an open beta with users, but had no official drivers we could legally pay within the system. So we had 6 months between our official launch and the launch of the app, where people could download it.
And when people started downloading it, was it Uber that was the only alternative on the market?
Yeah, Uber was the only alternative. There's some taxis that have an app, but it's not as well integrated for the customer. You don't have the automatical payment. You didn't have the GPS positions real time and so on. So and we're still is to this day, we're were the only two players in that province.
What was the hardest piece? Getting drivers on board or getting the riders?
Actually, once we started eating the media because we were allowed by the government, because there's a law surrounding taxis. You need a taxi license to operate, and those taxi licenses have a heavy price where there's a market on it depending on who wants to buy them. So we had to get around that, as Uber did when they launched in the province, 2013. So we had to go through that, and then we went on the media. A lot of people started talking about us on the media because the government gave the authorization, because we were telling like the government gives a monopoly to an American company while this little co-op Canadian startup doesn't have any allowance to go in the market. So we knocked on the door on many medias, and then we were we were on many medias, even the TV, complaining about the situation. So that got many drivers interested, and then we had a thing like 500 drivers applying on our website. Then we activated those drivers, and they were pretty hyped by the whole thing of like owning the business with the cooperative. By the business, I mean the franchise of the protocol within Quebec. And that got many drivers excited. So the drivers were not the hardest part. The hardest part is the riders. It's harder to get the customers, especially in a competitive market where the customer don't even know anything about blockchain, and that's not any argument that's going to convert the customer to your application.
And how did you compete for that side of the market?
Well, we've seen it in the New York market and mini market in terms of ride sharing. Is once you start giving ownership and incentives to the drivers that are superior, those drivers are motivated and they're not tied to only one platform. So basically, our drivers were Uber drivers as well. And we created a program of referrals. So many people in this program within our drivers in the co-op started to convert customers directly from the car in which they were driving people. And they started to give out $5 coupons on which they agreed to share the expense with the company because it's their own company. So basically, they started giving those $5 coupons, and we got many users. When we launched in the first month, we had already reached like 10,000 people using our platform. So the drivers, when they're motivated, they can convert a lot of customers directly. So that's how we got our first coverage. That in the media, because we were the first locally based alternative. And this is a parallel with what happened in the New York City market, where there was a player called Juno that entered and got a nice market share because it was driver owned apparently, and it got many drivers incentivized to actually talk about the business in their car.
What was the most challenging part back then in 2018?
It was definitely get the approval from the government and find local investors for the whole venture, especially with a blockchain model and cooperative franchises. It's really an out of the classic model. So it is still a challenging idea to pitch to people, especially with such a structure. But we definitely believe in this type of structure that fits well with the transparency values, the democratical values we try to have in the blockchain ecosystems. So yeah, we had an out of the ordinary model, and we tried pushing it forward.
Mhm. And I wonder, like, for investors, like, I would imagine that they have particular models that they understand really, really well. Like, for example, like Uber, and then you come through the door and you're saying like, this is like driver owned. This is a very different model. Like from the investor perspective, like, so how were they able to like and like really understand your model, or is it a particular kind of investor who is interested?
We got institutional investors from solidarity funds at the franchise level. So we raised a nice investment for the local franchise. So the first in Quebec. But the way the Eva ecosystem is designed is we have an incorporation that created the software and the protocol that takes 5% at every ride. Um, and then the franchise is taking 10%, and the franchise is responsible for marketing the application and the service locally. It is also responsible for technological fees such as the servers, the nodes within the blockchain to provide to their users. So things like that. And 85% goes directly to the driver. So yeah, that's how we're building it by making a decentralized ecosystem with ride sharing. You're actually allowing those franchises to be more efficient with their operation, be leaner. And taxi businesses have been making family live since over 100 years. So this model actually works. We just need to adapt it to a digital world where there's a protocol and an app provided and where businesses can be created on this protocol. So that's how we define the model, and that's how we've been creating it so far.
And what was the most challenging thing in 2019 last year?
The most challenging thing was the actual launch. We started to get like the approval from the government early 2019 officially, and we had a D-Day where it was the official launch and where people were waiting for it. We had the press conference, so it was the most stressful part on a personal perspective, because you've been preparing a thing since over a year, and now it's the time to launch it. So you're preparing for the worst according to Murphy's law, and that we did. The launch went super well, and after that we had a big challenge in 2019. It's the fraudulent credit card payment. Basically, we created our own internal commodity token bind to the Canadian dollar for the transactions. So since we have a blockchain and people can pay with their credit card, we had to create an exchange within our protocol where people, let's say they want to call a ride that costs $20. So they're exchanging those $20 from their credit card to $20 worth of token, and then they go on the ride. But the problem is that there's a lot of people buying stolen credit cards on the dark web, and then they get these lists and they use those credit cards, those lists of credit cards. They use it with digital service where you don't need the physical card, Eva being one of them. So there's a lot of people using them in the province of Quebec, and you actually need machine learning, and you need a nice anti-fraud system. And we realized from our first month's number that we had a lot of these fraudulent rides, and they cost a lot of money. You have to pay back the chargeback with Visa and other credit cards providers. So we decreased it 98%. It took us 3 months to really improve the software to get it through. But when I'm reading about Uber's numbers, like it took them at least 5 years to figure out how to solve that problem, because they were growing and growing, but they were not internally solving these problems, and it cost them dozens, many millions of US dollars to in chargeback. But it still happens today, like any system, any type of this anti-fraud system. It's not perfect yet, but we're at 99% now.
And how did you decide in terms of like running your own chain? How did that decision come about? And also, like, what was the most challenging about it over time?
Well, I think we're still in the early stage of the blockchain ecosystem. We didn't want to be dependent on the transactions of other people. Like the idea of a blockchain is to be transparent, is to have a block explorer and to have everything public in the system, so you can go in a law court and say you're not lying about your numbers. You can go to your insurance partner and they're actually sure you're not making up anything on your reports. It's actual increasing the confidence in multi-stakeholder business. And by having a public blockchain, even if we control it at the beginning, it was the way to go for us, because in the ESIO network, it is still great because you have half a second block. It's pretty fast, makes it possible for ride-sharing applications, and that's why we've chosen it. But the problem with the mainnet was the CPU staking issues we had early on, where you would stake some tokens to get some CPU, but sometimes the market would go crazy and what you actually stake was not enough for your users. So we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where other people speculating on the resource market of a public blockchain could stop our own operation by having any downtime. So, and the history of the chain has proven us right to do that, because we would have been down sometimes in the last 2 years. So we've created our own, we still have an EOSIO network, but it's an Eva EOSIO network. And every time there's a franchise, there's a new city or a new co-op joining in, they have to provide the nodes and the block producers within the blockchain. And right now we also have private people that just want to run their own node into our blockchain. And we're at block 90 million now. So it's been more than a year we're running this chain.
Yeah. And how many people on your team work on the chain side of things?
Actually, we're still a pretty small team in terms of developers. Right now, we're 10 developers. So I'd say like the infrastructure part is led by 2 people, myself included.
Got it. Interesting. And to the extent you can share, what are your plans in terms of other cities and like expanding?
Yeah. So basically, right now we're operating in Montreal. Our operation is based in Montreal. That's where we started our first franchise to operate 1 year ago. And then we started in Montreal. We realized some problems with our operations. We realized that it's a chicken and egg business that we already knew, but we learned more through our operation, the challenges of balancing like supply and demand. And from that, we've created a business intelligence platform for the franchise that is speaking with the blockchain, that is called Anna. So Anna is a software we created in the first year of operation to monitor bad activities from users, monitor bad activities from drivers, to make sure that the actual KPIs are respected in terms of ride requests, in terms of online coverage from our driver's fleet. So we're really optimizing to the software, the business intelligence side, and the quality insurance for the first franchises. So we went through the first franchise ourselves as Eva Global to actually make the software so that we don't need any developers in the upcoming franchises business. So that took some time, because you cannot just launch an app and then leave it. Like, you need people, you need humans, you need customer support. So we really focused on developing that side as our volume grew in the last year. And then what happened is that we started some delivery during COVID-19, but right now we're having an incorporated co-op in Alberta, so in Canada. We also have one that just got incorporated last week in New York City. So we're going directly for New York City after that, as we have an opportunities with many drivers there.
That's awesome. And do you think these cooperative models apply to other verticals? Like maybe you have friends who are working like completely unrelated to the driver rider, like transportation space, but do you think like those cooperative models can be also well applied to other types of networks?
Definitely, because from a philosophical and political perspective, I think that we're having less and less equality between the like I would say the medium income and the top 1-2%. And I think as we automate the job of people through software, we're gonna need a system where people are not enslaved by any application, and that have actual ownership in the protocol they're using. And we saw a way to do it in terms of incorporation through co-ops, but the idea remains the same: is to give more power to the users, to give more powers to the workers, and as we do business through an app, is to empower and enrich the people using this actual app, rather than having a middleman company extracting the value.
Yep.
So I think that any kind of business in the future that is going to do blockchain to do just that, to create the proper trust system, between people that offer something and people that wants to buy it is going to have a competitive advantage because of the incentivization of those two people in the transaction that is upgraded. So I think that we're going to see blockchain adoption more in this type of things once there's a competitive advantage with already existing solutions, because you're bringing more back to the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds like it's like more direct model, and
Yeah,
it's almost like programmable equity. You like have direct ownership in the system.
yeah. So that's what we envision for Eva, is to have direct programmable equity to the drivers, and or stock options, or any way we can do it. That's the goal. The goal is to have algorithms that allow quality insurance and allow good acting within the platform by giving out those advantages, such as equity and stock options.
Mm-hmm.
And especially in the case of a franchise business, they can own the local business. So now they're incentivized to the local success of the business. So I think it's pretty powerful.
Yep. Do you know interesting examples in the blockchain space of people in other verticals doing something cooperative in nature?
Honestly, I've been so much into Eva itself that since 2 years, I got out of many beautiful things that are happening in the blockchain ecosystem by being focused on the code and the development of our own business. So no, actually, I don't know any other kind of business that seek to do the same thing as us in terms of having like a co-op franchise in that exact sense.
Yeah, me too. Actually, I can relate to this like very much in a funnel vision. I'm not seeing the broad picture.
Yeah, same. Like I was seeing the broad pictures more when I was investing into projects in those days, but now it's mostly Eva, and Eva.
Yeah. I wonder, like, when you were looking also at regulations, I don't know if you know, but like, is there differences in terms of like where cooperative can take off better versus other places?
Yeah, it really depends on the local jurisdiction. It's like we're subject to the transport law, and the way we're envisioning Eva is that we're friends to the local cities. We're actually a solution to their problem, because they have those platform capitalist ride-sharing application that arrive sometimes illegally. But we want to position ourselves as the local franchise alternative. So you could have an Eva Seattle that is based in Seattle, that use the Eva protocol to do ride sharing, and that is owned by the local people that pays their taxes in Seattle. So the way we vision it is to be 100% legit. And so right now, for this equity model, we're waiting on like with the legal team, and we're looking for solutions to make that a possibility. And I know that the US is opening more and more to these, so that's good news. But yeah, so everything has to be 100% legal and approved, like any business. I mean, and yeah, that's how we operate. But the co-ops, they don't exist everywhere in the world. We have a really in the province of Quebec, we have a big credit union, and the cooperative model is pretty popular, um, and historically speaking as well, because it was a way for the French to actually work together when they were dominated by the British Empire in the 19th century. So it's a pretty interesting model here in Quebec that people know about, but I know that many people in the US don't know about the cooperative model. And I think that's not our job to educate them. We just want to make a system that's better for the workers, that's better for the people, where they're more incentivized. So we don't really care whether it would be an incorporated normal franchise business with local investors or a cooperative, as long as the value of driver ownership and democratical rights within the local company is there. We don't have any problem with that. We actually have taxi businesses that are interested in integrating our app as a franchise for their already existing fleets. So we're open to that too. And many countries don't even have a co-op type of structure. If you go in smaller countries in Europe, for example, you don't have these everywhere.
Yep, that makes sense. And if you were to have any advice for somebody entering the space, Web3 space or decentralized application space, what would you point these people to, like in terms of getting exciting? Why do this versus other types of entrepreneurship?
I think is get out of the buzzword. Know what really is the meaning of a blockchain in terms of computer science and in terms of like user ownership and transparency and trust. I think it's the misconception I see a lot with people investing or being out about blockchain is they're just excited about the casino part, about the cryptocurrencies, when blockchain is a big forest. They see only a tree and there's a big forest where we can revolutionize all sorts of things to transparency on the internet. So I see blockchain as like this three-dimensional web where we can see everything coming in and coming out. So we can get the snapshot of anything through time. And that's pretty powerful in terms of database structure, because you can develop a new metric and retrieve the past from the raw data of this new metric. So it's kind of having a whole new dimension to the internet, and making it public is even more powerful because now you can be trusted. And I think that's the most needed thing right now in terms of internet giants and in terms of how we're developing the internet, is that we need more transparency, and people need to know about data being a commodity because it's fed through neural networks, and people actually make money out of your data. So people need to learn more about their data, and I think that that's how blockchain is going to be great for the consumers and for people, is that I see it as like knowing what you're sharing to companies too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a melting pot of ideas I shared you of how I feel about blockchain.
Yep, and it's also kind of like almost a return to the roots of the early internet,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
and then didn't become that right now, at least. That
Yeah, I feel like right now most of the internet is controlled by a few, and I don't want that. I don't want that future, and that's why I love blockchain. It's why I want our economy to be binded to it, and people need to realize more about what they're doing online, what's about them in such database. And yeah, that's why I think blockchain needs to be here. Now the question is, you need an advantage so that the people don't need to be educated. You need better products so that people move to blockchain systems, and for that you need to make it simple and efficient. And what's been lacking so far, I think, in blockchain is the user experience, and people make complicated products with cryptographical approval, like wallets and things like that. I think like people want the seamless experience, even on blockchain, and that's what we've been working on Eva, so that our users don't even know they're on blockchain and they're using it, and we have a blockchain, and they can audit everything through a block explorer.
yeah, I'm on the same page. I think it's hard to educate the consumers and say, like, so it seems like developers are the ones who are like excited about it,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
and then it comes down to building like really good products that are actually better than the alternatives.
Yeah, and I think that now in 2020, it's possible to do blockchain products that are seamless, and that the users actually don't care if it's on blockchain or not. They don't really care. But if blockchain can provide them a competitive edge, like, I think that people will migrate to blockchain solutions if you can start redistributing to users. Um, Also, being in the idea of transparency can bring a lot of stakeholder confidence when you're setting up a business. Here I'm thinking about Eva because we have the Montreal airport as partners. Basically we have a booth there, and we have an employee who's promoting our service. We have a fleet of drivers always waiting there, so if you ever fly to Montreal, you can see our signs. There's Uber and then there's Eva. Anyways, like when you have partners like that, they ask for reports about billing, And blockchain provides you a way to make sure that you're not lying to those partners. And that's a powerful idea, because most of these businesses ask for a CSV report of the actual business you had, and they charge you a fee per ride you had there, for example. And if you have a blockchain system, they know you're not lying because everything is out there public. So, and same for the insurance partners, same for the cities, same for the taxes. Uh, it's impossible to lie when everything is public. And I think that transparency is important.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And where can people find more information about you and Eva online?
Yes, so you can go to eva.coop, which is our website. You can join our Telegram channel, which is in the contact section of that website if you want to get in touch with us. We also have the email contact@eva.coop. We're pretty active on Telegram. Our whole team is there. We even for our drivers, like they have a Telegram channels and they speak with each other through Telegram. We also have a GitHub if you want to look at some libraries we've open sourced for EOSIO blockchain transactions. We also have other media stuff, but I think you have enough now to contact us if you're interested to learn more.
Cool. Well, sounds good. That was really awesome conversation. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. It was great.
Thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of this podcast at openwebcollective.com. If you're a founder looking for help with product, go-to-market, or fundraise, apply on the same exact website. It's openwebcollective.com. If you really like this episode, I would really appreciate if you give us a review on a platform of choice where you listen to podcasts to. And finally, if you're on Twitter, we are at OpenWebFounders. Again, the handle is at OpenWebFounders. I'll see you next week.